So what makes Guild Wars 2's combat so good? This is the question we're gonna debate today. I personally think this is a very easy question to ask, but not an easy question to answer. So let me spread it out for you. But before we get into that, special thanks to all my supporters on YouTube, Twitch, and Patreon. And now let's jump right in. What makes a good combat? That's the first question we want to ask before we go into why Guild Wars 2's combat is actually good. So in my opinion, there are 3 pillars to good combat, and it's actually not only for MMOs, but it's for all games. I personally think you have to have fun combat. It has to be some kind of reactive and proactive combat. It has to be some kind of dynamic. I think if it's too static, if it's too slow paced, if it's just not as exciting, it has to have some nice feedback as well in there, some kind of nice sound, and just how it feels. It has to be just a nice and fun feeling. I think that's the most important part about combat. And that doesn't really matter in what type of combat you look at. It could be tap target, it could be full action cam. It doesn't really matter that much. It can be anything. If it's fun. I think it just has to be done well. However, and that's the next part here, I think that's not the only thing. That was just the first pillar of a good combat. I think the next pillar is a little bit harder to actually achieve, especially in MMOs, which is how easy it is to actually get into, how easy it is to play it. So how easy can you actually start out at the game and just have fun and not be completely overwhelmed by all the mechanics at once. So I think it should start out easy, and that's the third pillar as well. It should not only start out easy, but it also should be hard to master. I think there should be a big spread between how easy it is to get into and how hard it is to master. Because as the gap between those pillars gets smaller, so does the population of the game. If you want to get a casual community, then you want to have games that are quite easy to get into. Yeah, that makes sense. But if you then don't have any skill execution in the game, because it's just very easy to get into, and then you will have the skill ceiling reached in no time, then there will not be any try-hard community about it, because the game is actually too easy to actually try-hard it, if that makes sense. And therefore, I think you should have a big gap between how easy it is to get into and how hard it is to master. And now, let's take a look at Guild Wars 2, if all of those pillars are met and in which ways they actually make it possible. Why is Guild Wars 2's combat so good? Let's start with, I think it's extremely fun. It is very fluid, very dynamic. I personally really like it. It's perfect mix between tap target and action-based combat. I think it's not too crazy on the tap target side, while still having some kind of ease of use to make it not completely insane how much actions per minute you have to do to actually make it work. And I think it perfectly works in all game modes. It works in World vs. World, where you have big fights. It works in small fights in PvP, but it works also very well in just boss encounters in PvE, or even in open world. I think everywhere it works very well, and I think that's the biggest selling point of Guild Wars 2 as a whole, is the combat. Because it's so fun, it's so fast-paced, it's so fluid, and it's one of the best MMO combats out there, if not the best in my opinion. And I think it actually is quite hard to find a game in general, not even an MMO, that has this crazy good combat, in my opinion. Please let me know your take in the comments as well. I think this is very fun, but it's not the only thing about Guild Wars 2's combat. I think the dodging mechanic makes it also very fun. I think to have some kind of evade possibility, some invulnerability rate to some extent, makes it very fun and very just forgiving as well for new players, as well as being really challenging to master it, personally. Then we have the damage. I think the damage is quite nice. I think that how you see the damage, it's quite rather clear. It's not completely easy to see, but it's not too hard either. I think it's really fun, especially when you have the condition damage and power-based damage. I think that's quite nice as well. I think overall, I think it's decently well designed in terms of how the damage system works. I also think the support and the boons are quite fun as well. It's not very crazy to understand. It's not the easiest, I get that, but I feel like it's very fun. It makes, for example, quickness makes your attacks faster, alacrity makes them recharge faster. I think those boons are very fun to use, and all of them can be really fun. I think the supporting system of how you heal others is also very dynamic. It's very fun because almost all of it is AoE. That's really cool as well. So I think the single target AoE aspect of Guild Wars 2 and the power and condi damage scaling, I think all of that makes the combat very fun to engage with. Then let's get to the next point on the list. The next pillar, so to say, is Guild Wars 2 combat easy? I would say no, it's not. It's not easy. That's one of the biggest problems when a new player comes to Guild Wars 2. You will start out with a few skills that makes it easy, but as soon as you reach level 80, I think the game is actually not that easy. The combat itself is quite hard. Yeah, that's a big thing that I want to say. It's the biggest weakness of Guild Wars 2 is that the combat itself is already starting out quite hard. However, and that's the important part here, I think the targeting helps here. You have a tap target-based combat with some action-based combat in there. And I think the tap targeting aspect makes the game a little bit easier. You can see or clear the target quite clearly. It's quite easy to actually use the attacks on the target, and you can actually use your AoE attacks as well on the target. It's actually quite forgiving in that sense. And I think it's still quite easy when it comes to that you only have around 10 to 20 skills on your hotbar, while other MMOs typically have 30 plus skills that you have to have on your hotbar, or at least that you have access to. In Guild Wars 2, that's not the case. You only have 5 weapon skills, let's say plus minus a few, and of course 5 utility skills, plus your specialization skills. So typically you have, let's say, 10 to 15 skills on your bar. And I think that makes it quite easy to get into, because you don't have to know all the skills all the time and have to use all of them and have keybinds bound to them. So I think it's somewhat easy because of that. But I also think that most of the builds that you can play in PvE especially, you don't have to go for crazy actions per minute. You can play builds that are only auto-attacking, for example, and you will still succeed. I have a lot of builds on my YouTube channel about low-intensity builds that actually only use the auto-attack or a few more skills and achieve very, very good results with that. So I would say this is actually the combat quite easy in that sense. And I think it's also quite forgiving. I talked about the evade mechanic already. That makes it so that you can evade dangerous attacks and makes it quite easy even if you don't position yourself correctly already or use the skill at the wrong time. And I think the down state actually makes it quite forgiving as well. Down state is a mechanic where if you go down, if you would die to an attack, you would not die completely. You can be resurrected. You can't move anymore, but your allies can help you get back to your feet, and then you can fight again. And this is quite forgiving as well. You don't get one shot instantly, but most of the attacks will just kill you and put you into down state, and your allies can still resurrect you, and you can continue fighting. That can be really helpful in a lot of fights, and I think this is quite forgiving as a new player, especially if you go and start an open world, where there are always other players around you, especially in meta events, and they will help you. So this is really, really nice in that regard. The combat in Guild Wars 2 is quite easy to get into, in my opinion. It is not the easiest, I will admit that, but I personally think this pillar is somewhat fulfilled as well. And lastly, we have the hard to master pillar. Is it hard to master? Definitely. I think Guild Wars 2's combat is very hard to master. It depends a bit on the build that you play and the game mode, but personally I think it doesn't matter. Each game mode is so hard, the skill ceiling is actually so high that you will actually probably never achieve the skill ceiling. It's actually insane. Even in PvE, where you can perfectly plan out your rotation and stuff, there will always be some chaotic element, and it's quite hard actually to adjust to it. So what do I mean by it? Why is Guild Wars 2's combat so hard to master? There are combos in there, so you have combo finishers. Yes, nowadays they might not seem that important anymore, but still, this can be really clutch if you use it, especially in competitive modes at the correct time. But even in PvE, combos can be really good. What else am I talking about? Stats. Perfectly optimizing your stats and using them in the correct way in combat. Yes, I know, this is a whole other topic on its own, but that plays definitely into combat as well. How Guild Wars 2 stats actually work into combat. How to optimize your stats in your combat. And I think the biggest part of why Guild Wars 2 is so hard to master is that you have evades. You have blocks, you have reflex, you have jumps. All of that together can work in some kind of just negating damage or decreasing damage at least, because it can be so interesting if you use it at the correct time to actually deny an attack, while you would be maybe dead to that attack if you didn't do it. So the evades can be really good, but also only the positioning, where you stand while the boss doesn't attack, where you stand so that no one can pot to you while you're in PvP on a rock or something. This can be actually really insane. It can be such crazy and clutch moments if you do that correctly. And you can do bosses without dodging if you just position yourself correctly, if you use reflex, if you use blocks at the correct time. Or some attacks even can be jumped over. I think that's also very fun that you have this mechanics as well in the game. I think this just leads to a lot of counterplay, and the skill ceiling that it results out of that you can min-max so much stuff just by using the attacks and denying damage and that stuff while you do other stuff, and that you can move while casting is so important. It makes it so fast and fluid, while you still can do all your stuff and do, so to say, negate the damage just by being very knowledgeable about the fight, about the enemies and stuff. It's really good. That leads to a lot of counterplay that is possible. And I think that's a very important aspect in combat as well, that you can counterplay the enemy with just positioning correctly, using your defensive skills correctly. This is very fun if you just would have, so to say, one attack that does damage and the other one damages you back, that's just boring. If you can negate damage, if you can sidestep it, whatever, that makes it way more interesting to actually play the game. But that's not all why it's actually hard to master. I personally think they're also chaining skills so that you can queue up skills one after the other. Makes the game also very interesting, especially in PvE, where you can use that to actually get very crazy good rotations down if you queue the skills correctly. But you can also stop queuing them by using skills that interrupt the queue, like healing skills. That can be very interesting as well. But also the chaining, just in general, that you can use chain skills like the auto attack, but also other skills that switch over if you use them consecutively. So I think this is very interesting as well. There are so many mechanics in the combat that make it very hard to master, that you don't know when you start out the game and you slowly learn it. There is also the weapon swapping aspect, that you can weapon swap. Not only that you have 5 weapons skills, but you can swap to 5 another skills. This is obviously very cool just to have, for example, ranged in the melee weapon. But you can also make it hard to master in that sense because you can use the weapons stowing and weapon swapping to actually interrupt attacks, and they not go under full cooldown but go under interrupt cooldown. So that can be of a few seconds. That can be really helpful if you use it at the correct time. You can use that in PvP to stow skills that you would have a really crazy animation, force the enemy to dodge, and therefore get the dodge, and you don't get the full cooldown of your attack and cast it after 5 seconds, for example, again, and the enemy doesn't have a dodge and will get hit by it. That can be really good in competitive modes for that reason. But it can also be extremely good in PvE if you, for example, attacks have an aftercast. And if you then cancel the aftercast by weapon stowing, you can cast your attacks faster after another. That can be really clutch as well. So I think there is a lot of just min-maxing in the game to make it hard to master. But there are also other parts that are really crazy here. Just the general retargeting options or the settings to make actually casting a skill on an enemy, and while you cast it, swapping to another enemy and they actually hit the other enemy because you have the retargeting enabled. So there are a lot of cool settings that can adjust how fast, how interesting your gameplay is. You have instant targeting, so that means that you instantly use your attack after pressing the button without having any delay. And you also can do other stuff that makes this game just very, very interesting and very unique in terms of the combat. I think one thing that also has to be mentioned here is that the party and the squad composition is also very interesting, because that leads to how the combat is actually played. So if you use a party of only DPS, the combat feels completely different than if you would use it with supporters, because the supporters not only give you healing, but also give you faster casts, give you faster recharges and stuff. So the combat feels way more dynamic if you have a crazy good squad composition. But that also goes into World vs. World, for example. If you have healers and stuff, the combat feels completely different if you would go roaming alone, which is not a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing. That means that the game is actually very different depending on how you play it, and so the combat is very just unique and very rich in terms of facets that it can actually put out. I really enjoyed it. There are a lot of weaknesses of Guild Wars 2 also in the combat too, but I won't cover them in this video as it would burst the time frame for this one. So let me know in the comments if you want to see a follow-up video where I discuss the problems of Guild Wars 2's combat. But now, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know your takes in the comments as well. I would be really interested to see what you have to say about this. If you like this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks again to all my supporters on YouTube, Twitch, and Patreon, and I hope to see you in the next video.